Good morning to all of you in the Pinocchio United Church who are joining in, and with those of us in Basha, and also to all of you who are sharing with us online. I'm sad I can't join in with you this morning, but I don't want to share a cold that I'm living with. But I will share my thoughts with you. I'm so grateful to Fern, who is leading us this morning, and will read what I have put together. Just a caution. The opinions in this message are not necessarily those of the readers. That's Alan. Today is the fourth Sunday of Easter. My gosh, a month has gone by already. Traditionally, this Sunday is called Good Shepherd Sunday, and one of the scripture readings is Psalm 23. Psalm 23 is one of the best known and most loved of all the Psalms in the Bible. It often appears in devotional books and is frequently read at funeral services. And if you've grown up with this psalm, the chances are that you remember some of the words, or maybe you have it firmly embedded in your memory. It's a rich and beautiful poem, and there's been lots said about it. There are many ways to look at it, many ways to understand and treasure it. Now today is also the last day of Mental Health Week, a week sponsored by the Canadian Mental Health Association. It's estimated that 1 in every 5 Canadians has suffered or will suffer some form of mental illness or disorder. If that includes you, well, you're not alone. The good news is that there is help. In the sheet that you may have been picked up on your way in, the one about what's happening in the life and the work of the church, you can find some phone numbers and websites of people who can put you in touch with that help. The theme of this year's Mental Health Week has been empathy. So this morning I want to walk you through Psalm 23 and talk a bit about the emphatic shepherd. Who is this emphatic shepherd? Is it God? Is it Jesus? Or is it maybe ourselves? There are 3 pictures in the psalm that show us the shepherd. There's the green pastures and quiet waters, and also a valley of deep darkness. And there's a picture of being at home. The psalm says that the shepherd leads us to green pastures and along quiet waters. The shepherd leads us, is leading us. We're on our way. We aren't there yet. We're somewhere else. Where are we now? Oh my, don't we all want to be in the place that's safe, where we're calm and contented, where we lack for nothing and have everything we need? A place truly of well-being. And maybe we're just doing fine right now and we're trotting along confidently. We can already smell the water and the green grass, and we can already feel what it could be like to have what we really need. Or maybe that's not where we're at. There can be times when we feel we're in a rocky place, a hard place. Times when we're sad or anxious or stressed or lonely or just so tired. Perhaps we have a good idea why we feel the way we do, and we keep moving forward 1 foot at a time. Or perhaps we don't really know what's causing our feelings. Perhaps there are moments when we don't feel we can do anything to make a difference. Moments when we wonder whether there really are greener pastures and quiet waters, whether we'll ever feel like ourselves again in a place of well-being. The psalm writer says that God is emphatic. God meets us where we're at. God understands how we feel and leads us like a shepherd leads his sheep. Lead us to where, deep in our hearts, deep in our souls, we feel restored and refreshed. A shepherd who doesn't judge us. Ellen says, in the first church I served after I was ordained in Edgerton, near Wainwright, Alberta, There was a farmer who raised sheep. He invited me for supper so I could get to know him and his family. He told me to come early so I could meet his sheep. I remember they had a distinct smell. And I learned I was smelling lanolin, an oil so important to sheep and so useful to humans. But what I remember most was being told that while we often think of sheep as being silly or stupid, they really aren't. A flock is like a family, this farmer told me, and they like to stay together. They follow good leaders, including a good shepherd. And at the first hint of danger, they run because they can't fight. Oh, sure, they make mistakes, he said, but sheep are not stupid. God doesn't think we're stupid because we feel the way we do. God doesn't think others are doing something wrong because they're sad or lonely or stressed or anxious. Usually, this psalm is interpreted as meaning that Jesus is the Good Shepherd. And I think that's true. But what if, as Robin likes to remind us, we're invited to be Jesus to each other, to be Jesus to ourselves. We don't need to judge others or ourselves. We don't have to play the shoulda, woulda, or coulda game. We don't need to say, I should have done this, you could have done that, or it would have been different if only. Instead, we choose to be gentle and to recognize feelings for what they are. We can tell each other or ourselves, it's okay to cry, and it's okay to feel afraid, and that it's even okay to feel alone. It's okay to have the feelings we have, because our emotions are a way in which our bodies handle what we feel is too much to handle. Emotions are messages that we can't listen to, that can lead us forward when we're ready. So let's be Jesus, the emphatic shepherd to ourselves. Let's be kind to ourselves. Maybe we listen to some calming music or take a walk in nature, or we reach out and call a friend for coffee. And when we can, let's be emphatic shepherds to one another. Maybe we can reach out to someone who is having difficulties and just be there for them without wanting to fix them for them, without giving them our advice, but just to be there and to listen to them and maybe see the world the way they see it instead of the way we think they should. And often, this will be enough to move on, to head for those green pastures and quiet waters, to that place of well-being. Often, but not always. At any given time, nearly 5% of Canadians suffer depression that negatively impacts their lives, while another 12% suffer mood or anxiety disorders. And remember, perhaps 1 in 5 of us will experience mental illness of some kind at some point in our lives. The journey to well-being can be difficult. Sometimes, rather than being resolved, these feelings of sadness, anxiety, stress, or loneliness grow deeper and become heavier to carry. The road to those green pastures and quiet waters can be long, confusing, and painful. The writer of this psalm calls this a journey through the valley of deep darkness. If he or she has lived in central Alberta, they might have said that sometimes. It can feel like being stuck in a cold, gray winter day, and there's little sign of spring coming. Yet, says the psalm writer, even then, even in such a place, the shepherd walks with us. Even though I walk through the darkest valley, you are there. With your rod and your staff, you comfort me. Rod, staff. In ancient days, and still today in some parts of the world, Sheep weren't raised within fenced fields as they are now. Instead, they were led to new pastures, and the trail could be dangerous. The shepherd had his staff or crock, which he could pull or nudge a sheep back onto the path and away from the gully. And he carried a rod or a club with which to protect the flock from wild animals. The good shepherd guides and protects. For these who experience mental illness, that protection may come in the form of medical treatment, a stay in the hospital, or a support group. In this psalm, there is also a surprise. A banquet is set out in the presence of our enemies. Our enemies. I like the translation by a spiritual writer, Nan Merrill, in the presence of our deepest fears. Alan says, I remember a time when I was part of a group that hiked up the mountain near Banff. We had a trained guide leading us. At noon, we stopped at a vantage point with a spectacular view. We took out our lunches in brown bags or plastic containers, but our leader, well, from his backpack, he took out a white tablecloth and spread it on some rocks. He also took up some Cabernet cheese and a pâté, some olives and some grapes. Then he pulled out a bottle of wine, a corkscrew, and yes, a wine glass, and then a box of chocolates. After he poured his glass of wine, he passed the bottle around, and we each took a sip. And then when we had all eaten, he passed around the chocolates. When I signed up for it, I figured the hike would be challenging, and it was. But what I remember most is that surprise lunch. And there, says the psalm writer, there in the valley of darkness, in the shadow of our fears, the shepherd spreads out a banquet. I imagine the shepherd out in a wild, rocky place with her flock. She rubs oil onto the tired muscles and aching joints of sheep, or into a wound caused by thorns. And in a cupped hand, she gives the sheep some water from her water bottle. Or maybe the shepherd is like a dinner host and rubs expensive perfumed olive oil into the guest's hair. Okay, that's not our custom, not in my experience anyways, but in the Middle East, in ancient times, it was a sign of respect for the guest, evidence of empathy for someone who has arrived tired and dusty from their journey. And the host keeps that guest's wine glass full. In life's dark valleys, in times of deep darkness, the psalm writer tells us, the shepherd prepares a surprise for us. Perhaps the surprise is discovering enough strength to reach out for help. Despite the fears of being stigmatized or put down in some ways, or the fear that nothing will help, a person reaches out anyways. Perhaps the surprise is that despite their fears, they are respected and that what they are experiencing is taken seriously. What is good in this dark valley turns out to be a family doctor, a psychiatrist, medication, group therapy, counseling, and a supportive friend. And then the psalm writer sings these beautiful, beautiful words. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord my whole life long. It's interesting to notice that at this point, the verbs change. The tense changes. Until now, everything has been in the present tense. The Lord is my shepherd. You lead me. You are with me. You prepare a table. My cup overflows. And now things change to the future. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord for the rest of my life, that is still ahead. These are words of hope, our hope. I think these words are one of the reasons this psalm is loved and remembered. Perhaps the journey goes through a rough and dark place, and we find that we can't do it alone. But here's the promise. Goodness and mercy, goodness and kindness will follow us. The psalm was originally written in Hebrew, and the Hebrew word here means to pursue. Goodness and kindness, empathy and care will pursue us. They will come after us. We can dare to hope that well-being will catch up with us. We can dare hope that the writer of this psalm, that those who live with the mental illness or disorder, and those who are beginning to feel something isn't right, and others who can't be empathetic, who can reach out and be with others, we can hope that we will all come to a place that feels like home, where all of us find well-being, a house where, as we sang earlier, love dwells and where we are welcome. Perhaps one of those phone numbers on that sheet will be helpful to you, or perhaps there's someone you can reach out to and share those numbers with. There's also a leaflet I had handed out earlier with tips for talking about mental health. Pick one up on your way out if you don't have one already. Alan says, I want to leave you with a parable of my own. When I was working in Camrose, I met an elderly woman in care who was depressed. She was living with the early stages of Alzheimer's. Then one day I called in, only to find her happier than she had been for some time. Her daughter and her young grandson, who lived in BC, had come for a visit. While her daughter went to the washroom, her grandson opened up his small backpack. He took out a box and he gave it to his grandmother. Inside were glass marbles. The boy looked at her and said, "My dad says you're losing your marbles, so I brought you some of mine." That evening, she took down an empty clear glass flower vase. She decided that every day she would take a marble from the box and put it in the vase to help her remember something good about the day. She began with a large one to remember her grandson who had given her the marbles, and another one, brightly colored, to remember the laughter they had shared. I wonder, who was the emphatic shepherd in the room that day? Perhaps it was the woman's grandson who had reached out to her with loving kindness, and perhaps it was the woman herself because she had been gentle with herself and taken a helpful step forward. Or maybe it was the spirit of love and wisdom, the spirit that was in Jesus, who was in that room that day. Or was it all three? Thanks, Alan, for that.